Hello there, welcome to my channel. This is going to be kind of an interesting video, and instead of focusing on one device or one particular aspect of Eink, I'm actually going to compare three different devices that use both an Eink note-taking device in conjunction with a keyboard folio. So the focus here really is on those keyboard folios, and do any of these actually make sense? So we have three very different models from three different companies, so it's quite a large range here of experiences between these devices. The first device here is the Bigme. This particular device is the 1051 black and white light. There's actually a number of other devices in the 1051 lineup, but it's this particular one that I think makes the most sense, as it's definitely the cheapest of the group by a fairly large margin. This is basically running an older version of the Carta e-ink screen, and it has a 10.3 inch size in the viewable screen. So that's our first device. Our next device is the remarkable Paper Pro. This is actually a device using Gallery 3. It's the only one of the three that has a color screen. The color isn't relevant to the typing experience, but you do have the ability to write in different colors and see images in color on this particular device. This one has an 11.8 inch screen, and it's in the middle of our group. The last one at the edge here is the Boox Note Max. It's also the most recent release, although all these devices have been released within the last 6 months. They're all fairly new to the marketplace. The Boox Note Max is a 13.3 inch screen, so it's the largest of the group, and it comes with the latest black and white version of Carta 1300. So we have three different sizes here. We've got different screen technologies, and we have other differences as well. Of course, three different companies. Now, in terms of kind of the dimensions, the weight and the thickness of it, the lightest but the thickest is the Bigme device. It comes in at 972 grams, but it's 16.3 millimeters roughly in terms of its thickness. The remarkable Paper Pro is in the middle on both counts. It comes in at 1,030 grams and is about 14 millimeters thick. And then finally, the Boox Note Max is obviously the heaviest at 1,188 grams and 13.5 millimeters in thickness. And it's what you would expect. You would expect it to be heavier as you go to the larger screen size, and then they kind of flip it in terms of thickness, with the Max being the thinnest and the Bigme being the thickest. All of them, though, are relatively light. They're certainly lighter than, say, using a PC or Mac counterpart, so there is that advantage there. And they all are relatively in the ballpark of each other, both in terms of weight and thickness. The Bigme does feel just a little bit chunkier. I did a back of the envelope kind of equation where I took the weight and divided by the viewable screen to get kind of a grams per inch, if you will, and did find that it was the most dense on the Bigme. And you do kind of feel that. It's not huge, but you're certainly aware of that as you're lifting the devices. The other two devices are pretty equal in terms of being able to spread out the weight to their size. So there's just one small difference, but nothing really huge that separates them. The thing that really separates these devices is the price point. The Bigme, again, this is the device and the folio, comes in at $468. The remarkable Paper Pro device and folio comes in at $779. And finally, the Boox Note Max device and folio is at $800 as the most expensive. So a huge jump between the Bigme to the other two devices. And the question that we'll be exploring in this video is the extra money that you're paying for either the remarkable or the Boox worth it in the end, or does Bigme score a win here on having the most cost-effective device of the bunch? We're going to explore that first by focusing in on the keyboards themselves. Then we're going to just look and see how responsive each device is to typing, both in their note-taking app or, if applicable, in Word. And then finally, I'm going to give my final thoughts on each, and ultimately, I'm going to recommend only one of these devices, and even then, with some caveats. So let's go ahead and dig on in and take a look. So this is the case, the keyboard folio for the Bigme devices, and this case will fit any of the 1051 series devices. And I think there's either 5 or 6 of them in total. What we have here is a little bit of a bump right in the middle, and this is the hinge that allows the device to prop up. And the hinge is nice in that it does allow the screen to be at different angles, which is unique amongst the 3 folios that we'll be looking at. However, if you did put this side down, the hinge does pop off a little bit higher than the side of the case. So this won't sit flush against the table. And if you press down on it, it will wobble slightly. I don't actually find that to be the particular issue. It tends to kind of lean toward one way naturally anyway. So it's not a thing, but I did want to just point out that this can't lay flat because of this hinge. You do have a cutout for your camera and flash, and presumably this would be for scanning documents and what have you. The other thing I want to point out is you do have the stylus here, and much like the Note Max, there is this unfortunate flap which is available. There is a little B here for Bigme, which is kind of a nice touch, so I appreciate that. But the flap itself I wouldn't recommend using, and the good news is that you don't need to. The Folio does come up slightly against the side of the stylus, and so it does to some degree protect the stylus in place. The magnet here is not as strong as, say, with the Note Max, but because of how far the Folio comes out beyond the device, it actually helps create a little bit of a barrier that should hold this stylus in place. Is it foolproof? Absolutely not. It is possible for the stylus to jar loose, but I think generally speaking, this does help keep it in place more than not. So I do appreciate that feature of the device. Let's go ahead and open this up and take a look at the keyboard. And here we are. Again, we have a trackpad, which I do find to be extraneous. I wish they didn't have it. You can do slight scrolling with it, but for the most part, it's just for mouse navigation. And there's no controls to alter the sensitivity of the mouse as there is with the Boox Max. So basically, it is what you get. And I'm not a huge fan of using mice on Eink devices, and this doesn't change my mind. So I kind of wish this wasn't here at all. And again, you do have a touchscreen device, so you're only a short distance away from being able to navigate that way. So I really feel like there's no need for the mouse, but nevertheless, here it is. You do notice on the bottom row, there's a standard set of keys. Same for the next few rows above that. And in fact, actually all the way here to the top, this is pretty much a standard keyboard layout until we get to the very top row. The top row is we start to introduce the buttons, and all these buttons can be pressed directly. You don't have to press another key in the buttons because they're dedicated for these shortcuts, which is kind of nice. I really like that. This button here is the home button. This button reduces front lighting or increases it. The temperature is on screen, and you can either have these toggle both or one or the other. That is cold or warm lighting, depending on what you set. You've got your search feature. That's a screenshot. This is your task manager menu. This icon presumably would bring up a web browser, and perhaps there's a place in the settings to be able to associate that, but I found I wasn't able to get this button to work. No matter what my context was, whether this is a home page or in an app, I did not see how this button functioned. In a similar fashion, these kind of reverse, pause, and fast forward buttons do function, but they're app dependent. So if you're in the home screen, they won't do anything. But if you're in an app like YouTube, they certainly do work. Same with these audio functions. It doesn't work in the home screen to mute or unmute or increase or decrease the sound, but in the right kind of app like YouTube, they certainly work perfectly fine. And then finally, you have this kind of lock key that if you press that, it puts the device into sleep mode, and then to get out of sleep mode, you just press the power button on the device and it will activate in a couple seconds. I like the key. The placement above the backspace button isn't necessarily great, although I have to say, as I've learned to use this keyboard and get comfortable with it, which I'll talk about in a second, I don't generally hit this on accident. I have done that on a couple of occasions, but it's been a while. So I still think that could have been done better. Like I would have put this maybe over here and extended the backspace up or something like that. Well, heck, even replace this button, which doesn't seem to function, and just leave this blank, or make this toggled to a function key, as is the case with the Boox Max. Regardless, it could have been done a little bit better, but it's not as bad as you'd think once you get used to the keyboard. Now, the keyboard itself is not as big as the others for obvious reasons. The device it's housing is a 10-inch screen, and so the keyboard folio can only be so big. If we measure the distance between the A key and the semicolon, we can see that it's roughly 17.5 centimeters, actually a little bit under that. So it's roughly about 93 or so percent of what a normal keyboard is, and it does take getting used to. You do feel a little bit cramped on the keys, and initially when I first started typing on this, I didn't like it at all. But what I did find is that you do get used to it, and in a comfortable setting where you've got the keyboard at an appropriate height, you get used to it and it eventually works, but there is that adjustment period. The last thing I'll point out is that the device itself, unlike in the other cases that we're going to be talking about, is loaded into brackets. So the other cases are magnetic, but these actually slide in, and then you can see it eventually connects to the pogo pins down here at the bottom. I was a little concerned about this Folio. I thought that the brackets might make it look a little bit, I don't know, cut rate or what have you, but in practice actually they work great, and they look fine. I don't have any problem with that at all, and it sits nice and flush in the device. So this system actually works great, and I don't have any concerns about it. Okay, we're now going to take a look at the Bigme device. I'm going to go ahead and fold this flat back and then just push it back like so, and we're good to go. The device is comfortable inside of its brackets. Now let's go ahead and see what it's like to type on this. I will point out that we have the Eink center set to, let's go ahead and go to extreme to get the best typing experience. Now there's a couple ways that you can type on the device, and the first is through their Notes app. So if we go in and we click New, we have the option of creating a text file. So let's go ahead and just create one like so. Now, one of the unfortunate things about how Bigme has done their layout is that the cursor is actually starting behind this menu bar. So I'm going to go ahead, bring it down, and you can see the cursor right there. I won't go into all the specifications, but you do have your standard kind of formatting and word processing specifications here. So if I click on this, for example, you can see you can change the font. We'll bring that up to 6 to make it more visible. You do have some coloring and some formatting options as well. So it handles all the kind of basic word processing functions. Let's go ahead and see what it's like to type, and let me verify that we've got the right, yep, we're on extreme. So let's go ahead and do a little bit of typing. So pardon my errors, I am actually kind of going around the camera to type so we get a good view of the screen. But that's basically what it looks like. Let me go ahead and say out the words to get a better sense of the connection between the typing and what you see on the screen. So this is what it is like to type on the Bigme. So as you can see, it's not exact to what I'm saying, but it's very close. The faster you go, you do notice a little bit more variability. But generally speaking, I find the responsiveness on the screen to be fairly acceptable. Now, if you didn't want to type in this type of format, you can type in any type of application. And in this particular case, I do have Microsoft Word, so we'll go ahead and open that up. Okay, so we're in the mobile version of Word here. If I click on this, I can get all the formatting that you associate with this version of Word, and then you can, of course, minimize it. Let me go ahead and type here. Again, we'll validate that we are in extreme mode. Okay, let's go ahead and see what this looks like. And again, this is what it is like to type on the Bigme, and that's my error right there. So you can see it's pretty flexible in that both the native note-taking app has the ability, to take type input, but also any other type of app that you download. In this case, it's Word, but it could have been, Outlook. It could have been Google Docs. It could be anything that's available on the Google Play Store. And that's basically the experience of working with the Bigme. So this is the remarkable Paper Pro Keyboard Folio. And it's very much in the same design as their other fabric folios. You have the same texture here. It only comes in this one color, but it features the remarkable logo, and it also features this flap, which if you remove and flip over to the back side, reveals this kind of indentation area where you could then secure the flap, and then the folio will be more or less flush when you put it down. There's no indication other than the thickness of this back side, and you can kind of see a little bit of the thickness there from the ridge, that there's a keyboard at all. And in fact, if we open it, we won't see the keyboard, much like a normal remarkable folio. So let's go ahead and open this up. Like so. And as we can see, we've got one side of the folio over here, and then you've got the device over here. There's no sense of the keyboard. So how do we get to the keyboard? Well, I'm going to go ahead and fold the folio back and then turn this around. And if I lift up the tablet, like so, and move it back, that reveals the keyboard itself. So it basically resides in a hidden compartment. The keyboard that you get is fairly standard. If we do our measurement here, the measurement from the end of the A key to the end of the semicolon key, roughly 18.8 centimeters, very much a standard keyboard. In addition to that, you see very much a standard layout of keys. The only particular difference is this particular button, which when you press it and you're in a text mode, it basically gets rid of the menu items on the side, and it allows you to use the stylus as a selection tool. Or you can press the button and then the menu comes back, which allows for drawing input with your stylus with notes. But other than that, it's a fairly standard keyboard, and there aren't any type of special shortcuts as we see with either the Bigme or the Boox devices. You do have some lighting of the keys. You can kind of see how the letters, they're not currently lit up, but you can see how they're whiter for the letters than they are for some of the surrounding keys. And these will light up, as will the indicator of this button or of caps lock being on. This will be orange when it's on, and this lights up when it's on caps lock. But it's a fairly standard keyboard, and it doesn't have a trackpad, again, like the other two, which again, I think is actually a good thing. The screen is literally right here. I'm touching the screen now. So it's not far from the keyboard at any point in time. It's certainly only slightly farther than moving your hand down to where a trackpad theoretically would be. And the device is designed for touch, so there's no need for a trackpad, in my opinion. So it was a smart choice on Remarkable to be able to get rid of it and make use of that space in their design, which is easily the cleverest design of the three. Again, I'll go ahead and retract the keyboard from its magnets, and you can't see the keyboard now, and it's not on the back side. The back side is the folio itself. So a very ingenious design for the Remarkable Paper Pro Keyboard Folio. Okay, so let's take a look at the Remarkable Paper Pro. I'm going to go ahead and flip this over like so, and then we're going to go ahead and lift the keyboard, or the device rather, to expose the keyboard. And there we go. Now, typing on the Remarkable is basically limited to the note-taking application. And there's not a lot of formatting that's available here. We can see if we click on this little icon next to the cursor, then what we have is the ability to go with 3 different sizes of fonts or 3 different styles. and then, or you can do bullets, or you can do check boxes. That's basically it. There's no way to change, say, the color of the text, the actual font, or the size beyond those three options. So let's go ahead and just jump right in then and see what it's like to type on this device. Okay, and then also go ahead and speak it out. This is what it is like to type on the Remarkable. And for some reason, it switched fonts. I'm not quite sure why it did that, but I can go ahead and change that if I'd like. There we go. And I'll just show you the other sizes. And there you have it. Now, one thing you might notice is that there is a lot of real estate on the side of the device. And if I go ahead and get rid of the menu over here, it doesn't readjust the typing. Now, I believe the reason why this takes place is if we turn the device like so, let's go ahead and get it out of the keyboard and do the rotation, then it makes a little bit more sense in this mode, in this horizontal, vertical rather than horizontal mode. So I think that might be the reason why. But the important thing to understand is that you cannot go beyond these margins. There's no way to change the size of the text. So it's very limiting in terms of what you can do. You can basically just type on some of the screen and not the rest of it, which is kind of interestingly limiting in terms of you have all the screen real estate, but you can really only use maybe 60% of it, if that. Okay, a couple other observations before we leave the Remarkable is if I go into, say, a PDF document, and we'll just go into this lecture document as an example, I do have the ability, there's no text box ability here, but if I do go ahead and enter a note page, it will insert this page, which then does allow me to have a text box. And you can see the options are the same as they were in a notebook. So let me go ahead and type in here. And there you go. One other observation that we can make here, as well as in the notebook, is that basically the typing is almost exact to my pressing of the keys. It's really amazing how responsive the Gallery 3 screen is versus the other devices. It's really just perfect, frankly, and really close to an LCD experience in that regard. So that's one of the things that surprised me about the Gallery 3 and the Remarkable is responsiveness really was the best of the three devices. So here we have the back of the Boox Keyboard Folio for the Note Max, and we can see the kind of the crease here where it folds to prop up, and you've got the Boox logo here. One thing I want to point out is that this Folio does come with one of these flaps, which I don't particularly care for any longer. But the good news is that this flap really is extraneous. You don't really need it because the stylus, although the cover itself doesn't really extend beyond the stylus, as we'll see in one of the other folios, the flat side of the stylus, which is here, just leans right against the flat side of the Note Max, and then the strength of the magnet, those things combined allow for a really strong connection. I'm not saying that the stylus can't get jarred in transport or what have you, but it's probably going to hold in most cases. So you don't need this flap at all. So that's the good news. You can completely jettison it. Let's go ahead and then open this up and take a look at the keyboard itself. So here you can see the connection points, and then these tabs are designed really, these are just plastic tabs here. They're designed to kind of hold the device in place and prevent it from jarring, and they seem to work fairly well. You do see a little bit of kind of indentation here and here, and these are around the speakers. So this allows the speakers to face down without actually muffling them, and they do a pretty good job in that regard. The keyboard obviously comes with a trackpad. I'm not a huge fan of trackpads. I don't like using mice on e-ink devices, and I don't feel it's necessary because, you know, the screen normally is right here, so it's a touch screen. You can just touch it as easily as you can use the trackpad. So I find this particularly extraneous. But you can do gesture controls on the trackpad, so that's nice. And if you really want to use a mouse, it would certainly work for that function as well. I just don't know why people would want to do that. If we look at the bottom, it's a pretty standard configuration of keys. Same obviously here, here and up here. So this is really a standard keyboard layout. Where you start to see some differences in the very top row. Of course, you've got your number keys. That's pretty straightforward. And you've got your delete key here in the corner. But in the upper corner, the upper left corner, you can see some of the icons for the keyboard shortcuts. About half of the keyboard shortcuts that are available are indicated by these icons, and the other half are a combination of button pushes that you have to kind of go into the menu to understand. Now, the Note Max does not have the ability for front lighting or color, so these first four icons are completely extraneous on this particular device. Will there be future devices that leverage these functions? Perhaps. But for now, only the Note Max uses this particular folio. You do have a refresh button, so you'd press your function button and that to refresh the screen. You do have volume controls. This is mute or unmute, and this is the sound toggle. Here you have your screenshot. Here you have your e-ink center. Here you have a nice kind of split screen toggle, and then there you have a search function. Finally, you have your sleep mode. So if you press your function key and this key, it will go into sleep mode. And then in order to get out of sleep mode, you just press the power button on the device itself, and that will get you back into the device in just a couple seconds. So that's what the functionality of this keyboard is. The last thing I want to kind of highlight is that the distance from the edge of the A key to the edge of the semicolon key, or home keys, is a little over 18.8 centimeters, as you can see there. And that is basically the length of a standard keyboard. Generally speaking, this is a pretty standard layout. I did have one person that I kind of asked as a pair of fresh eyes to see what their thoughts were on the keyboard, felt that the height of the keys were unusually large, and she initially found that a touch jarring, but thought that you could adjust to that over time. I personally didn't notice that myself, but that's one perspective. Okay, let's take a look at the Boox device, and here I have the fold side up. So I'm going to go ahead and lift this up, bend it, and then just connect it right in to the pins like so. And here we go. We are in A2 mode, so if we go into the e-ink center, you can see we're in A2, and that's the most conducive to typing. Before we start actually getting into typing, let's go ahead and swipe down here in notifications, where we can go ahead and do a shortcut into settings. And these are all the settings that are related to the keyboard folio. I'm just going to focus here on trackpad gestures just to give you a sense of what is available. So here in gestures, the first three are customizable, and if I click on the custom, those are the options that you have in each of the customizable options. And so this one, the 3 fingers up is customizable, the 3 fingers down is customizable, the screenshot with 4 fingers, customizable. And then you have some ones that are static. So you have your app switcher, which is 3 fingers to the left or right. And then your scrolling with 2 fingers is static, as is pinch to zoom. And finally, dragging an object as it indicates there. So those are the things that you can do with the trackpad, in addition to using it as a mouse, as you can see there. I didn't mention this in the Bigme video, but on the Bigme device, there are no options to customize the trackpad. So it's basically just a mouse with clickers. This has clickers as well. In addition to that, you do have the ability to scroll with 2 fingers on the Bigme, but that's about it. So a lot more functionality here on the Boox Note Max. Okay, having said that, let's go ahead and go in, and much like the Bigme device, there's two predominant ways that you can enter typing, and we'll start with going into the Notes app, and then we'll go ahead and just create a text notes. So we'll just create one real quickly here, and get rid of the on-screen keyboard. There are settings that you can use to get rid of that automatically. So let's just go ahead and start typing. I think we'll make the font a little bit bigger. And you can see it has the very standard kind of word processing functions that you would expect. Neither the Boox nor the Bigme has any type of word processing, but apps like Word does. But let's go ahead and start typing and see what that looks like. Okay, and then let me go ahead and read them out, and then you can see how that works in terms of the responsiveness. This is what it is like to type on the Boox. So as you can see, there's much more of a lag on the Boox device compared to the other two. Whether that bothers you or not is a matter of preference, but clearly of the three, this is the least responsive. I wouldn't go personally as far to say that it's terrible. I do notice it as I'm typing more than the other two devices. I find it a little bit more jarring, but I could also see other people thinking this isn't an issue. So it really just does come down to your particular preferences. Now, much like the Bigme, you can also go into apps, and this is identical to what we saw with the Bigme. So we're going to go ahead, and go into the Word app, and we'll just go into a blank document here, and validate that we're in the right mode. There we are, A2, it's the best mode for typing. And let's go ahead and we'll eliminate that, and let's start typing. Okay, and the beauty of going into Word, of course, is I can go in and change, do autocorrect. There we go. And fix my mistakes. All right, let me go ahead and sound it out as we go through. This is what it is like to type on the Boox. Okay, and again, the behavior is exactly the same here in the Word application as it is in that rich text within the notes. So no differences there. Just for a little bit of a bonus, what I have here is the keyboard folio for the Boox Tab Ultra C. So this was basically a device that was released, gosh, I don't even think it was last year. I think it was almost 2 years ago. And it also featured a keyboard folio. And I'm only mentioning this because for a reference point, and we'll go ahead and open this up, the keys are roughly the same size as they are with the Bigme device. So if we go ahead and take our measuring tape and we look at the centimeters from the A key to, let's get this untwisted there. So from the A key to the semicolon, it's about 17.3 centimeters. And actually, that means that the width of these home keys is just slightly less than it is for the Bigme device. So just to put this into a little bit of context, there is a precedent for keyboard folios with 10-inch devices, and it was very similar when Boox did it a couple years ago. Okay, so now that we've gone over these devices and kind of taken a deeper look both at the folio as well as the behavior of the typing on the screen, let me just give you my overall thoughts and how I kind of rank these. And we're going to start with the Remarkable Paper Pro. And this is such a fascinating device. And it's fascinating in the way that Remarkable oftentimes is fascinating, in that so many things that they do is like the greatest and the best out there, but in the end of the day, it doesn't all add up. With the Remarkable Paper Pro, the folio is absolutely amazing. The design is by far the best. And again, as a reminder, here is what it looks like. The keyboard is completely hidden. it's underneath the device, and it folds out. And it does fold out, as I said earlier, into two different angles. One of them is a little more designed for a combination of typing and writing, but nevertheless, it does have two angles. The Boox Max doesn't have that, so it's notable. And of course, I love the integrated flap design, as is the case with their normal Folios. So really, I would argue that the keyboard itself, the touch and feel of the keyboard, the fact that it doesn't have a trackpad, which I'm a fan of not having that, the design of the Folio, and even going into the device itself, the responsiveness of Gallery 3, which really surprised me, all of those elements are the best of all three devices. There's no question. The only question presumably left would have been, did it justify the price point? The problem, though, ultimately, is that the software really lets this experience down. How limited it is to type text in these notes, and just in particular, not using the entirety of the screen size, or at least more than it does, to me is kind of inexcusable. I mean, I just don't know why I would want to type on this, particularly something of this size, when you can barely take advantage of that size. So it's the software ultimately that lets it down, not the hardware. To put it another way, let's say that Remarkable announces tomorrow, oh, we've integrated Microsoft Word as an app that you can run in these devices. Or maybe they'll come up with their own Note, which is a rich text format that uses most of the screen and allows for the ability to change fonts and what have you. That would instantly change my opinion on the ranking of this. And it might even go to number one. Again, the only limitation at that point would be the price. But the software is so limiting on what this device can do, I can't ultimately recommend it despite how great the hardware is. And it is easily the best. I want to emphasize that. The hardware is number one, but the overall experience with the software ranks it last for me. That then takes us to the Boox Note Max. And there's a lot of pros with this particular device. You have the high resolution 300 ppi screen. You've got the keyboard itself. While maybe not quite as premium or as innovative as the Remarkable, it still feels pretty good. The keys have a nice touch to them, and is a little more on the premium side, I would say. You have all the flexibility of being able to type either in their native note-taking app with their rich text format, or you can go into an app like Word and then use that or other. So a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do with the keyboard. So there's really a lot to like here. I'm not generally a big fan of the touchpad, as I've said a number of times in the course of this video, but the fact that you do have these gesture controls and some of them are customizable is a really nice touch, and you would hope to see that on a device that did have a trackpad, and that's certainly the case here. So again, a lot of positives. Of course, the headline negative here is that it costs as much as it does, the most expensive of the group, albeit by a small margin over the Remarkable, certainly a significant margin over the Bigme. For that, you do get the 13.3-inch screen size, but I find typing actually a 10-inch is just fine, and I didn't really find that extra real estate was particularly helpful to have. It didn't have any advantages in terms of the typing I was doing. So, with that comes the additional weight and as well as the additional expense. So there's a lot of kind of negatives there. This particular keyboard Folio does have an issue with the spacebar, where sometimes a spacebar will register 2 spaces instead of 1. But I'm going to throw that out. I'm going to discount that as a production issue with an earlier run of the Folio, and that future Folios will not have that issue. That's my inherent assumption, but just be aware that was the issue with some of the first Folios that came out, for sure. But putting that aside, overall, it's not so much that the Boox Max is a bad keyboard Folio experience. There's just a lot of positives here, and the negatives aren't terrible. It's just that for the price, that's where I ultimately kind of question this. And I don't necessarily feel that what you're getting for what you're paying for justifies that price. Now, some people are going to completely disagree with me, and they have, as you know, I've discussed the Boox Mac, say, on Reddit or what have you, that for them, they love the fact that it has, you know, the trackpad to use as a mouse, and they love the real estate of the device. You know, I just don't see it personally. And it's a preference thing. I understand that. It's not that the other people are wrong. You know, it's just their use case and your preferences align more toward the larger screen. I just didn't find that those advantages really added up. And I'm someone that really loves the Boox Macs overall. I think for taking notes, for reading newspapers, and I've done a whole video on the integration with Press Reader, which is just an amazing app, especially on this particular device. There's a lot to love about the Boox Note Max. It's definitely a premium device, and I recommend the tablet. I just don't necessarily recommend the Folio. But again, you may differ, and depending on your own use case and what you want, but I just wonder if it's really worth the cost. So we're going to close then with the Bigme device, and this is the one that I recommend, albeit conditionally. Now, let's start off then doing the opposite of what we've done before. Let's talk about the negatives of this, and there are a number of negatives of this keyboard Folio. First off, the Folio itself, the texture on the outside is, you know, fairly nice. I don't know if I would call it premium, but it certainly gathers dust like you wouldn't believe. I've tested all three devices on various surfaces. No issues whatsoever. Maybe slight dusting on the Boox Max, but that's kind of stretching it a bit. This thing dusts if you look at it the wrong way. And I actually had to take a paper towel and wet it slightly just to clean it off at one point because I just couldn't get the dust off. So just be aware of that. It's not nearly as premium as the other two Folios are. And that extends to the keys as well. There's nothing wrong with the keys, but they don't feel good like they feel good on the Max and the best on the Remarkable. They're just plastic keys. You know, they're not bad, but there's certainly nothing to go, wow, what an experience. And I think the ultimate problem for some people will be the fact that this is a more compact keyboard than the other two. I can tell you that when I first used this, I hated it. And I had a couple other folks, you know, play with these different Folios as well, just to get different perspectives for preparing this video. And one of those two other individuals absolutely hated this keyboard, again, because of the size. And it's roughly 94% of what a normal keyboard would be, again, just in terms of the length between the home keys. But I found personally that I adjusted to that eventually, and I actually started typing on it quite comfortably after that adjustment period. So the question then for you, if you're considering a keyboard Folio, is how sensitive are you to the size of the keyboard? And if a more compact keyboard is something that isn't work well with you, then this would not be a good device. But ultimately, I did find that I adjusted, and it's just fine. I love the fact that this keyboard Folio has the hinged back that allows for different angles. I love the fact that this device has front lighting. The Boox Max does not have front lighting. The Remarkable does, so that's a plus in its favor. But just the ability to go anywhere in any environment and be able to see the screen is really fantastic. In addition, the screen itself is inherently lighter, particularly versus the Remarkable. And so it's a little easier to see in different environments, even without that front lighting. And I never turned front lighting on during any of these demonstrations, by the way. It's only been the lighting in the room, albeit set up for filming, so it is kind of an ideal lighting in a sense. But nevertheless, you get a sense of what the screen looks like without the aid of front lighting. One thing I haven't talked about that's a little bit of a negative with the Bigme is the fact that when you open the Folio up, the keyboard will be exposed on the back. Now, if you type on the keyboard, initially it will register those inputs, but eventually, and I don't know what the trigger is exactly, it figures it out that you're no longer using the Folio, and then it stops taking the inputs. And so pressing the keys isn't such a big deal. Nevertheless, it's never fun to hold this in Folio mode. If I were to not want to use the keyboard, I would have to really take the device out of the Folio in order to have kind of a comfortable experience. The Boox Max is somewhat similar in that it does feel a little awkward to hold it in the Folio and have your fingers on the keys while you're holding it. Nevertheless, with the Boox Max, it has the advantage because the pins aren't connected when you fold it over. You'll never get false inputs as a result. Again, this is where the Remarkable shows how much it shines because it hides the keyboards. That's never an issue. You can use the Folio as just as a regular Folio and ignore the keyboard. The other cases, the Boox Max and the Bigme, you do want to take it out if you just want to use the tablet itself. That's something to be aware of. So I think it's pretty clear, but I'll just say it out loud. The reason why I like the Bigme device isn't because it's premium, because the other devices are better in that regard, but it's certainly functional. And given that functionality, in conjunction with the price point, I just have a hard time justifying spending over $300 to get a slightly larger screen with either inferior software, as is the case with the Remarkable. And again, by inferior, I'm specifically focusing on what you can do with the text, not the overall experience of the tablet itself. And then the Boox, which has basically the same functionality in terms of the software, with a larger screen. I just don't see either of those devices providing the value for the cost. Even though they're the more premium, even though there are things about the Bigme that feels a little bit cheaper, especially in relation to the others, it's just the overall package makes a lot more sense to me, even though the other devices are fundamentally better devices. And let me kind of close on that particular point, talking about the device itself. Because understanding how I feel about the device itself is really important in understanding the context of how I recommend it in conjunction with the Keyboard Folio. If I had the option of purchasing this device without the Keyboard Folio, would I do it? And the answer is probably not. This device comes in as $10 more expensive than the Boox Go 10.3. Now this does have some intriguing advantages over the 10.3, which I'm going to get to in a second. But if you compare the native note-taking app and the native reading app, where you can do annotations on different document types between the two devices, as well as just the nature of the devices themselves, the build, the construction, the Boox Go 10.3 is the clear winner between the two. I want to be really clear about that. Now, what's intriguing about the Bigme device is that what if your use case was not to use native apps like the Reader and Note Taker and focus more on Google Play apps? And that becomes a little more intriguing because in that instance, you've got a device then that has a lower PPI and isn't quite as premium, but still has good hardware overall, comes with front lighting, and at least in my initial tests, does better job at handling ghosting. So there are advantages to the Bigme device versus the Boox device if your use case focuses more on using it as an Android tablet with an e-ink screen. Then it's a much more of an intriguing proposition. But again, if we're comparing just what the devices can do in terms of note-taking and reading, then the Boox is the easy winner in that case. I'm so intrigued by this comparison, specifically as a Google Play e-ink tablet. I'm going to do a subsequent video to delve deeper in it and finally answer that question. Are there certain circumstances where I might recommend this tablet over the Boox Go 10.3? I don't know that as of this filming. I'm not sure. I'm just intrigued by the idea. Therefore, the reason why I'm recommending it in the context of this video is entirely because of the combination of the device and the Keyboard Folio. It's for that specific use case. So I want to be clear, the recommendation is for the two combined. For those people looking for a typing e-ink experience, that's what my recommendation is. And again, it's not a perfect device in that regard either. I just think for its price point, I can deal with the faults and I don't see the reason to go for the more premium options. Okay, so that does it. I hope this helps illustrate the differences between the devices. Of course, I've made my recommendation in this video, but what's more important is what is the device that's best for you. And hopefully I've laid out the information so that you can make your own decision. If you have any additional questions that kind of help you on that journey, please feel free to put that into the description, in the comments rather, and I will respond as best I can. Even though I have a recommendation, ultimately my focus is that you get the device that works best for you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that help you get to that point. All right, so I hope you enjoyed the video. I look forward to seeing you next time. Until then, I hope you have a great day.